Hello and welcome to the Compassionate Men's interview series. Today I'm honored to be talking to Scott Kriens. Scott was the CEO of Juniper Networks from 1996 to 2008, where he is still on the chairman of board of directors. He is also the founder and director of the 1440 Foundation, which is involved in, quote, supporting programs and best practices that cultivate authentic relationship skills in education, wellness, and the workplace. Thank you for joining us today, Scott. I know you're a very busy man.
Oh, I'm glad to, Kozo. I enjoy spending the time.
So I wanted to start off with some background. And I know in your leadership development practices, you do an exercise called Lifeline, where you give the chapter titles of your life. And I'm wondering if you could do a really quick lifeline for us about your life here.
Sure. It's in the interest of brevity, I'll make it a short one. Exercise actually tends to take a good half hour or more, but the compressed version is a time spent through high school, working in a gas station, going to community college, eventually to the local state university, and then off into the workforce. Not really with a direction per se, but just fortunate in many ways to be in some of the earlier days of technology and in particular earlier days of networking. And so I had lots of opportunity professionally to be in the sort of proverbial right place at the right time. And I think to sort of speak in life terms, it was easy to be caught up in the metrics that were obvious in the absence of deeper understanding. A job, a career, financial well-being, a home, a family, and obviously all good things. But as I would reflect a bit, I think what I did in those pursuits was bury the question of purpose and meaning. And then in the sort of the combination of some, what I'd call trauma personally, which was the loss of my father about 10 years ago, and the good fortune of having more time than some get the opportunity to take, I've had some time in those last 10 years to reflect on other lenses one might look through to find reasons to get up every day, and have been very fortunate to be surrounded by a lot of great influences. So that's the condensed version.
All right. Well, we're going to get into a little of that. I have some questions about certain parts of that. But first I wanted to ask you something about authenticity. And I know authenticity is very important to you. I found that the more authentic I am with others, the more I can love myself. And then that opens a door for me to loving others. In terms of compassion, it seems that authenticity brings self-compassion, which awakens compassion for others. Do you find this to be true in your practice and teaching of authenticity?
I do. And the way I would say it in terms that we find easiest is we define authenticity as when someone is sharing what they believe as opposed to what they want you to believe. And in that process, one lets go of outcomes. And the freedom that brings is that if we let go of outcomes and we simply share what we believe, I think we're a little bit freer to let down our guard and get a little closer to ourselves. And we're a little less protective or a little less defensive, and we can afford to take more chances, or we feel better about it. And as a result, I think it does produce a level of compassion that starts with self. And I am okay, and I'm not just okay conditionally on one outcome or one person's perspective. I'm just okay. And I think that's, in my way of saying it, the compassion that originates from authenticity, or at least authenticity contributes to it. And then, like all things that originate with true sincerity from self, they propagate and they invite others to join. And sometimes it's subliminal, but it's nevertheless very real.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I know the story you tell about you doing the lifeline exercise and then having people do it in small groups and then them coming out going, "Hey, wait, I want to tell my lifeline to the whole group," right?
Yeah,
And
yeah, it's very
that's just
true.
amazing. Um, the other thing I want to pick up on is that, you know, I found that when I'm most authentic, um, when you're being most authentic and you're revealing something that's very, let's say, hidden or that maybe you're ashamed of, I
Mhm.
found that the responses I get aren't the responses I expected. So I expect people to look at me and go like, "Oh, Koza, you're such a bad person." But they tend to like when you're truly authentic, they tend to like almost shower you with love. It's like, "Oh, thank you for being so vulnerable," right? And that propagates, like you said. I think it propagates not only your own self-compassion, but this relationship with others, where you can see each other just in the light of love. I think it's a great uh, it's a great practice.
The story I tell, which is kind of my image for the best way of describing this phenomenon you're talking about, is it's kind of like having a high school dance at the gym, and the girls and the boys line up each on one side of the dance floor of the gym, and somebody has to be first to offer and the first to make themselves vulnerable by walking across the gym floor in front of everyone else and asking someone on the other side for a dance. But of course, 5 minutes later, everyone's dancing because everyone wants to. And I think that when someone is courageous and puts themselves out there, they invite a practice and an engagement that all of us want to participate in, to let down the guards, to not consume the energy and the effort to be so protective, but to just relax into the space and do that in a way that, again, lets go of outcomes. And it's such a desirable thing that when we see it, we feel encouraged to be part of it. And in a sense of gratitude, we appreciate that person who walked across the gym floor first. That's my way or my analogy, I guess, of the condition you're describing, and I think it's very insightful and it's very real.
Yeah, I love that. I love that story because it shows that everybody wants to dance, right? Everybody's sitting there. They want it. And, if you take the metaphor out, everybody wants to connect. Everybody wants to connect with others, and we're just resistant to it. And when someone makes that first connection, that opens us up to, do what we want to do.
Yeah, we all want to. And if
Yeah.
you think about it as kids and as you watch little kids, we want to do what we used to do
Yeah.
when we didn't care and it was all fun.
Yeah.
And we were uninhibited and it was pure joy.
Yeah.
And of course, we miss that. And sometimes it's odd to wonder why we make it so difficult to just be joyful, uh, like we once were. And I think the opportunity to return to that is easily understood once we sort of lean into it.
Ah, yeah, that's beautiful. So I'm going to be devil's advocate here a little bit. Um, I'm reading a book. It's called Radical Honesty by Brad Blatton. I don't know if you know about it, but it challenges us to be radically honest at every moment. And um, in your experience, can one be too authentic or too honest? And I have a good example for you. For example, what if someone came to one of your leadership development seminars and you're going through your authenticity practices, and that they just stood up and said, I don't believe in any of this junk. I'm just here to get ahead. I know you're the CEO. I want you to think good of me, so I can retire and go play golf. You know what I mean? Like they said that in the setting of an authenticity seminar. Is there a point where you can be too authentic or too honest? Because that might be what they're truly feeling or thinking, right?
I would say this. it's a good question, and I'll give another example of it. But in the example that you bring, I think the test for the appropriateness of a comment like that is whether it is offered authentically. If it's truly authentic and someone saying, this is actually is how I feel, is that I'm just sort of here to get to the golf course one day, and I'm not bought in, and I don't feel this way that you're describing, and so forth. If that's offered in true openness and authenticity, then actually I think that's a gift, because that's somebody in their way being courageous enough to say how they feel and letting go of an outcome. Now, obviously, someone could make those same comments with a different agenda, which I would then call not so authentic. And if it's really meant to disrupt and so forth, or to draw attention to themselves, or if they're venting just internal frustrations or whatever, then, there's obviously other motivations that could make that sort of contribution less of a gift, let's say. But there is a philosophical point, at least, and it's actually a real one, about authenticity and appropriateness and honesty and candor. And, if you were honestly feeling judgmental about someone, and that really is how one felt, is it allowable under the banner of authenticity to pass along those judgments, that this person is too much of this or not enough of that or something? And do you defend that by saying, well, that's actually how I feel, and therefore I'm going to let go of how it makes you feel and say it anyway? And so, as always, the world is more complex than to make it one-dimensional. And so authenticity in an evolved condition is married with empathy and compassion, and it's not so formulaic. But as we disassemble the piece parts, for the sake of our understanding, it's helpful, in my view, to isolate them. But then we have to reassemble them in the practice of real life with other real people. And therein lies the subtlety.
Yeah, I love that. I love that this authenticity. I think of it as like opening your heart, like you build up all these walls around you, open your heart. And yeah, you have to marry that with compassion and kindness, and it's almost like you're opening your heart so others can open their heart. And if you open your heart and it causes others to close their heart, then you're not really connecting, right? And I love that point. So this is where I wanted to talk a little bit about your life. And I was wondering if we could talk about 2004. It seems like a very critical moment in your life. Looking back almost 10 years, do you see this moment as an awakening? And if so, what did you awaken to?
If you mean with the 10 years ago, actually, to the month here, was when I lost my father. And I don't, I certainly wouldn't call it an epiphany or some sort of enlightened experience. It was actually a traumatic experience that I really maybe still don't, but I certainly didn't understand it fully at the time. And I only came to have a perspective on it over actually the years that followed. But I think what it did do in the moment, and what it brought about, was what I call experiential confrontation with mortality. And for me, prior to that, it was a concept. I mean, people had died. I was 45 or 6 years old at the time. And obviously, in 46 years, grandparents and others not so close to me in many cases, of course, had passed. But there was something more abstract or expected or something to do with that. And in the case of my father, I was confronted with this unavoidable experience of mortality. And the question that it raised, that became the driver, I guess you could say, is what matters? The time we have is not only finite, but it's actually brief. And so how we use it ought to be put against the question of what matters. And so that was the insertion that I couldn't ignore, and that just forced me to stare at the condition I found myself in and ask that question over and over. And I still ask it today. So I don't propose that I've found answers. I do think the answers are found emanating from within. That much I have narrowed it down to believe. I don't think you find it outside in the rest of the world, or at least it doesn't originate there. But I certainly don't sit here presuming I have or perhaps ever will some epiphany or enlightenment that provides the absolute answer. But that question being forced into my world was an intersection that changed a lot of things.
Yeah, I'm just gonna mirror back that like it seems like you shifted your focus inside in a certain sense, and like you said, what matters, and you looked in, those answers were coming from inside, and I think that coincides with in 2004. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, you started a sitting practice. You started a meditation practice around that same time period.
It was, yeah, it was about a year after that, year or two. It was kind of in this, what I'll call it's really groping uh, for answers to that question and for grounding. And so in the 2005 timeframe, 2006, I was introduced to a teacher and began a sitting practice and a journaling practice. And I still do both those things every day. And it is very grounding. And I suspect we'll never know what didn't happen, but in the absence of the jarring confrontation, perhaps I would still be today without those supports. But that's certainly one of a couple of the things that came about as a result of the new directions.
Yeah, so that segues perfectly into my question. So one of the biggest complaints or excuses I get when people hear about meditation is, I don't have time to meditate, right? I just don't have time to. And you were the CEO of Juniper Networks in 2004, right? And why or how did you find the time to meditate?
Well, it's for the most part, it's a 15-minute sit that happens in the morning before the day begins. So, I guess the simple answer to your question is just get up 15 minutes earlier. But also, I think in order to make time for anything, it has to be valued. And the value of meditation for me is not in some discovery I make during the sit many, many days. It's in the rigor and the reliability of the time. And a lot of times I think the benefits of it show up in clarity of thought throughout the day. And so it's not so much that, the simplistic thing to say is, well, if you make more time for meditation, you'll need less time for other things. But I'm not really a fan of those kind of platitudes because they're sort of simplistic. But for me, I would say the discipline of it or the rigor of it and the reliability of it, I think helps me more than what it requires in the way of time. And that was true then, and it's more true than ever today.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, that's impressive because you're going on 10 years now, right? So you've been rigorously practicing this for 10 years, and I mean, your life seems to be going really, really well. So it's not like you're pursuing more benefits from it. It's just you're keeping up the rigorous practice.
Well, it's practice. I guess it's all relative. It's more than some, and it's less than a lot of people I know, and especially in terms of dedicated time over extended silent retreats and and making a priority of time away and time to themselves and time in silence and in meditation and in practice and in training. And there's any, number of impressive examples of people that have
Yeah.
made more time commitment to it than I have. But for me, I don't know, it fits into my life.
Wow. I like that. Um, okay, so this is probably my most controversial question. as as the vanguard in the networking revolution and the director of the 1440 Foundation, you sit at what I consider the heart of the intersection of technology, authenticity, and what I call the growing compassion movement. I'm wondering if you could talk about the powers and the pitfalls of mixing technology with authenticity and compassion. For example, I think the internet can be a tool that can help us see that we are all one. And I think of Sam Reese's Exchange the World that you just awarded as a perfect example of how powerful the internet can be to connecting us all. But at the same time, the internet also seems to have what I call an institutionalized inauthenticity bug. And the example I give of that is phrases like LOL and IMHO. A lot of times when people text or type or comment LOL, they're not laughing out loud. Or IMHO, in my humble opinion, is often followed by something that's not humble and not phrased like an opinion. So I'm wondering if you can help us navigate this very powerful but potentially dangerous intersection of authenticity and compassion with technology.
It's a great question, and actually, I have what I'll call a strongly held opinion about it, which is this really simply is that the mission, I will say, for technologists or let's just say innovators of any type is to bring the most powerful innovations to the community that we can. And the reality in an imperfect world is that it has both negative and at least we can say unintended consequences in many cases. And so maybe this is a rationalization, but I don't really think so. The goal of the innovator is to innovate and then to make available those innovations. And if we invent hammers and people build shelter, the fact that somebody takes the hammer and hits somebody else over the head with it is an unfortunate reality of an imperfect world. However, on balance, the world is better off with the shelter that hammers can help to build. And so when we talk about technology and the power it has in the networking world to connect, the mission statement at Juniper is only 4 words: connect everything and empower everyone. And it's quite literal, and every word's quite meaningful to us. So empowering everyone, literally everyone, by connecting literally everything. Meaning that you can take used mattresses that would otherwise be thrown away, and you can put them on container ships and send them to third world countries, and vendors can pick them up at the harbors and carry them into the villages and trade them for $3 worth of village-made goods, which can then be put on eBay and sold by those vendors in the world market effortlessly and without friction. When you see those kinds of things that the network makes possible, microfinance, there's millions of great examples of connecting everyone, empowering everyone and connecting everything. Yes, there are consequences or people that will behave badly. but those are probably people who would behave badly anyway. And to the degree even well-intentioned people may use an LOL or an IMHO in an insincere and inauthentic way, I believe that when we increase connectivity and we increase accessibility between one another, the net contribution to the community of that is positive, even though in the imperfect real world there will be abstractions. We can't, as innovators, pretend to control that, and we can't constrain the power that we have the opportunity to deliver to those villages and to people by enhanced communication and connectivity under some false pretense that we can control the behaviors of people by withholding our innovations. So I actually have a very strongly held view about that, and I suppose it'd be hard to change my mind.
Wow, wow. I really love that answer, Scott, because I realize that I'm falling into that negativity bias, right? Like I'm like, ooh, violent video games, pornography, and like kind of that, and I'm forgetting about all of the great humanitarian, equalizing things that this connectivity, the internet, like you said, has created in our world. You think about Kiva and microfinancing, how much that has changed people's lives, and I think we tend to do that. We focus on the small negative stories and we forget about all the great positive stories. So I really appreciate that answer.
Well, if it's any comfort, what happens over time is the negative stories give way, and what's remembered is the positive. And I'll give you a funny example. The earliest and most predominant use of most communications technologies is pornographic. And in the early days of Morse code and the telegraph, most of the traffic over the telegraph wires was suggestive messages between the operators in between the use of the telegraph for formal messages by customers. But few of us would know that. And most of us would remember that Morse code and the telegraph was a revolutionary communications vehicle that connected people in ways that used to only be possible by horseback over days. And the fact that some of the early uses of it were less than we might judge to be ideal, at the end of the day, doesn't really matter. So I would put forward that when the history is written about the internet, yes, there will be some uses that would not fit into the value systems of many people. But on balance, what it's likely to be remembered for is going to be far more positive.
Wow, that just opened up my mind. Thank you so much. I've been asking that question a lot lately. I asked it to Father Richard Rohr. I asked it at the Compassion and Technology Conference, and I've never gotten the answer that I was satisfied with. But I'm really happy with that answer. Thank you, Scott.
Well, we all hope it's right in 100 years. We'll never know.
Yeah. But I can see, because your example of the Morse code and the telegraph, that I could see that there are these kinks that start off with, but in the long run that connectivity is really going to be the most important thing. And I just think about like you and I doing this right now, and that somebody in Australia can watch this interview and generate compassion. That's an amazing thing.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. So my last question is, I know you have a teenage son. I'm not exactly sure how old he is right now, but I'm wondering if you have any advice on how to raise compassionate boys, or what you did to instill compassion in your son.
I have a son and a daughter, both teenagers. I guess I'd say I have no great wisdom on parenting. But what I hope to be true, and again, it's one of these things that history will have to judge, I suppose, as he becomes a man and goes out into the world on his own. But and this may, at the risk of sounding a bit cliched, in my opinion, the most powerful thing we can do for our children is be the example that we hope for. Um, because I think maybe all of us, but kids are far more perceptive and insightful than perhaps we as parents or adults give them credit for. And I think even when they may not know it in explicitly conscious terms, what they're affected by most are the behaviors they see us exhibit and the care, the compassion, the empathy that we either do or don't demonstrate in our own lives. And in a way, those land, in my opinion, far more powerfully, especially with our own children, because they are looking at their parents in ways that are way more influential than we maybe realize. And so the most well-intentioned parent who has the greatest advice on compassion and empathy, but then behaves in their own lives in a dissonant way, in my opinion, is far less likely to be an influence of their desire on their children than one who says perhaps very little, but in what they value and prioritize in the practice of their own life, they communicate volumes. So I think it'd be very dangerous for us as parents to rely on what we say. And I'd vote, and at least I guess I'd say for both Joni and I as parents, what we try and do with great intention is to be the kind of examples we hope for. And obviously that's good for us and them and hopefully those around us. So it's a good formula in our view because it works in every situation.
Wow. Yeah, that's great advice. I know you said you didn't have any advice, but that's great advice. advice. But can I ask you a question? Something came up while you were talking about that. Has there been a time when you actually practice authenticity with your son? So, you might have come up to him and been truly authentic about, hey, I made a mistake or like, I messed up or like, I did something because I was angry at something else at work and I came home and I took that out on you. Have you actually had practices like that with your son of just being completely authentic with him? I know it's harder with teenage boys, right?
Uh, I'm not sure it's sometimes difficult to remember. We're very fortunate with our kids and with Drew is my son's name. I've had any number of times where I've found myself needing to go and sit down with him and say, instead of accepting you and what you've done, I pushed more than I should have on you because of what I thought and without regard for acknowledging what you have done, I've pushed you on what I thought should have happened. And so whether it's with the best of intentions or not, it's it's a mistake I've made. And actually the great reward for that, in my view, is that, or in my experience with Drew, is that he'll come in to my room after being frustrated about something and say, hey, Dad, I'm sorry I got mad about that. It was really not that. It was something else, or I overreacted. Or so, when you see it come back and you feel like, well, there's room in this relationship for both of us to acknowledge one another, it's very gratifying.
Yeah, and knowing that your son is going to take that emotional intelligence or that vulnerability out with him into the world, right? And his relationship with his significant others and his children maybe in the future. That's beautiful. That must be really rewarding. So. Well, Scott, thank you so much. Thank you so much for taking your time. I know you're really busy, but also for the 1440 Foundation. And for those of you who don't know about the 1440 Foundation, go to 1440.org, and it's an amazing resource of just that intersection of technology and compassion that I see, technology and and authenticity, not inauthenticity. But there's just some amazing projects going on there, and I love, and I gotta say this for Joni, I love the title of 1440. 1440 is the number of minutes in a day, and whenever you say that to yourself, 1440, you just remind yourself that you have 1,440 minutes every day, and each of them matter, and just that reminder, I think, makes the world a little better place. So thank you so much.
Well, you're more than welcome, Kozo. I've enjoyed the conversation, and I'm happy to visit, and I'm also very grateful to Joni for that labeling and that reminder. We can always take one, share one, celebrate one, and there's lots more where that came from. So thanks for sharing these last 30 or 40 with me, and
Yeah.
look forward to being in touch.
Great, Scott.